Let me introduce Keith Rutledge, who's my co-conspirator in this event. And welcome everybody, thank you so much for coming. This is a very fine spring morning. Tell me, how many of you came to the March 28th meeting that we had here to prepare for this one? Excellent, thank you all so much. At that meeting, just to give you a little context here, at that meeting we had representatives from many of the Sherwood communities, and we decided that today was a good day, a month on. My name is Brian Weller, I'm from Brooktrails, and Keith is from Spring Creek, and we've been sort of rebel-rousing behind the scenes. And some thank yous really go to the great support that we've received from Brooktrails Community Services and District. Denise Rose, is Denise still here? Ah, there we are.
She's making more food.
She's making more food, yes. And also her staff, Elizabeth and Philip, for their wonderful work. And I must also thank the Brooktrails board. I think Rick, you're here, Rick Williams, yeah, their chairman, and Tony Ord, and thank you for coming. And Tony Sanchez, and also Ed Horrick, and also, thank you sir, and also Tina Tyler O'Shea. Where's Tina? Yeah. And Tina, as many of you may know, is our recent addition to the board and already making a great impact. So thank you so much for your work. Just by way of putting a frame or a context around why we're here today, I think most of us were certainly concerned, maybe rattled, by the fires that happened at the end of last year. And one of the things we do know, you know, we've chosen to live in a beautiful place, and there are dangers here, as we all know. And fire is no respecter of life or property. Having been here for quite a few years now, my first and, in a sense, lasting impression of Northern California, or Californians, is that we're an interesting collection of creatives, misfits, traditionalists, people with their own mind. We very much value freedom, but along with freedom comes also a sense of responsibility. And danger always brings a sense of urgency, and I think that's what we felt at the end of last year. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Not just in our local area, in Redwood Valley, Potter Valley, but also in Santa Rosa. And along with that sense of urgency comes a possibility. And that real possibility, that opportunity, is to begin to feel and work and act as a community. There's nothing like danger to bring us all together. And it's this sense of community that Keith and I want to encourage all of us to develop and adopt. If a fire begins in one of our houses and spreads, our neighbors get impacted, and maybe the whole community. So this is a very important idea. I'll be introducing the panel in a minute, our first panel, and you may notice this chart we've created at the back here. This is from the Office of Emergency Services. And you'll see that there are 4 quadrants here. The blue one is mitigation, the red one is preparedness, moving down to the green one, response, and then recovery. And if you notice, if you can see this, the very first bullet point under mitigation is public education. And this is what we're doing here together. One very important thing here, this is really the first of a series of meetings. Not only meeting together like this as a group, but also developing neighborhood meetings, maybe meetings in your streets. So without any more ado, let me introduce first Lieutenant Shannon Barney, is our county sheriff, and also OES specialist. And then we're moving on to Todd Patton here with CAL FIRE. And finally, our own John Neuer, who's the Deputy Chief for our Brooktrails Fire Department. Each of them will have about 15 minutes to speak. So thank you, gentlemen. Maybe we can start with Lieutenant Shannon Barney. Thank you.
So I'm Lieutenant Shannon Barney. I am overseeing the Office of Emergency Services. We have one full-time employee in the Office of Emergency Services currently, and his name is Rick Ellert, and his title is the coordinator. And we have right now going before the Board of Supervisors a request for a second position and then a third position, because what we're finding in the last probably 5 years is we do more grant management and budget work in the Office of Emergency Services, and we're behind on the planning side of it. So that's one of the things we're trying to address to do in the very near future. And so far, we've gotten support from the CEO's office to kind of go in that direction. I also am the Chief Deputy Coroner of the County of Mendocino and the Investigations Commander. And a little bit about me: I was born and raised in Mendocino County. I'm from Covelo. Spent about 45 years living there. So I know the isolated community, limited access, limited resources issues quite well. I think all of these issues are not any different in any given community. They might be a little bit different with a few differences. But like he was saying earlier, I think one of the things living in this type of community that we have is we have people who are entirely more self-sufficient and self-reliant, either themselves or with their neighbors' help. You know, that we have a big advantage over a lot of the people in urban areas because they rely so much more on the government. One of the things that I took over the Office of Emergency Services in 2009, and it was in the CEO's office prior to me. It moved over to the Sheriff's office. The Sheriff and the CEO is the emergency manager for the county, and the Sheriff is the assistant emergency manager, and they work very closely to try and address issues of on an emergency basis or emergency planning and issues like that. I was also the incident commander for the Sheriff's office side of the first night and full day of the Redwood incident last October. So I have some insight into what can really happen. I'm not ever claiming to be a firefighter. I don't understand fire near as well as the gentleman on my right. But I also am an incident team member on one of the CAL FIRE, the 6 Type 1 incident command teams in the state of California. So I have some experience there as well, and it's really kind of taught me that in a lot of sense, what we're seeing from fire specifically is changing in the last 5 to 10 years. And so a lot of the fire response agencies, and that would be OES, law enforcement, and the fire service, they're having to change their mentality to try and deal with these. We're seeing much larger fires, much more fuel, much bigger, faster. You know, we're getting some changes in weather patterns and things like that. What you saw in October in Redwood Valley with the winds was probably, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, probably one of the first major wind events that we've seen in Northern California like that, and it kind of caught everybody off guard. So I just came back last week from the 6 incident management team conferences down in Riverside, and I think what we're starting to see from PG&E and SoCal Edison, which is PG&E's version for Southern California, is they're starting to look at on those red flag warning days, like we had, whether or not to just shut the power grid down, you know, to try and get ahead of those kind of things. So for multiple years now, I've been coming to Brooktrails. Brooktrails is one of the fire districts that has really kind of, I would have to say, been ahead of the evacuation thought process and planning. And I know there's been some changes recently John just told me about. But of the fire districts that I'm associated with in the county, Brooktrails is pretty top of the line. They've been ahead of the game plan, you know, so to speak, and I know we have to readjust on some of our evacuation processes. These kind of meetings are kind of critical because my boss is, I don't think he's here, and the politicians in the room may not really appreciate this, but one of the things I kind of try to tell people is we need, and this is my personal opinion, I'll clarify that right now, is that I think we've educated people to the point that we are over-reliant on what the government can actually do in a first few days of an incident. You know, and what our push at the OES level at the county is, prepare yourselves, prepare your community, and then those agencies that are sitting up here will work directly with you. And as a team, we will be in a much better place than a lot of what you see in the urban areas is there is an extreme over-reliance on government. You know, and our population in California, since, you know, I came on with the sheriff's office, probably grown by a third, but our personnel resources have not. We're operating with 1970s numbers of deputies. On the night of the Redwood Valley incident in Ukiah and Potter Valley, which encompasses Hopland, basically from the Ridgewood grade south and over to Boonville, we had 1 sergeant and 2 deputies on. That is all we had to try and evacuate people in an hour of extreme firestorm activity. And at one point, the sergeant who was in Potter Valley was not even aware that there was a fire in Redwood Valley. You know, it was that fast, that extreme. And so what we end up doing is we called all hands on deck. I pulled the coast guys over. We had 2 over there. I called the Willits guys down to Ukiah, but they didn't get there because it crossed over Reeves Canyon and cut them off. And the coast guys got cut off that way too. So, but we had probably 3, I think, from Ukiah Police Department and 2 CHP officers and 1 tribal police officer. So that is not adequate resources to try and evacuate the number of people we were trying to evacuate. And then we had the fire department. You know, on the initial fire was in Potter Valley. They went around to the Potter Valley side, and then all of a sudden it broke over the hill. And so their resources, you know, being that time of year, were not, you know, fully up to staff either. So these are the realities of what we deal with. And so as we educate ourselves, and I want to tell you this one, I don't want to be a negative Nelly, but on the one incident that really was very sad is that we had one couple who were awoken in the middle of the night by their neighbors and told to leave. And they actually stated that they would wait for the fire department to come get them. Wow. And they are deceased now. The fire department could not get back up the canyon. They only had about 10 to 15 minutes to get out of there before the whole area, and that's up the Tom Kai Road area, the whole area was just engulfed in flames, and even some of the fire department members almost never got out of there. You know, so those are things that we have to kind of relook at. The mechanism of which we notify and warn people is advancing, the technology is. But we have simple things like the night of the fiber line between Ukiah and Willits burned in half, and that instantly cut off all communications to the north at all. So you guys were out of communications, as I probably don't need to tell you. It cut off Howard Forest dispatch. You know, so we had very little opportunity to actually call in on the phone. We still had some radio communication, but I know there's some ham operators in here. Can you raise your hands? So one of the things in the big picture of what we're trying to plan for is we have to have redundancy in our communications, because oftentimes it may come to, you know, a ham operator on one ridge talking to a ham operator on another ridge talking down into, you know, the city of Willits, for sake. The other thing we need to plan for is major catastrophic issues. At the OES, probably 5 years ago, we worked a lot with the state and FEMA to prepare for a major incident on what we call the Cascadia Fault, which is off the northern end of Mendocino County, goes all the way up into British Columbia. And it is a major fault that is long overdue. Its history is it goes off big about every 300 years, and we're like at 315 years, and they're expecting the possibility of a 9.0 or larger on that fault. So these are things, you know, personal preparedness, you know, he referred to it earlier. These kind of things, you know, have your food, have your medications. How many people, you don't have to tell me what it is, how many people take medication, you know, on a regular basis, okay? How many people have 30 days or more in advance of their medication? That's good. That's actually good. One of the recommendations we do, work with your doctor. We have about a 3-day supply of medication on some of the medications in the county. So if we have a major event that cuts off roads or bridges, you know, your 3-day supply is going to run out really quickly. In some of those situations, there's a plan for an air bridge to bring in more supplies, but we have to face the reality is that the urban areas are going to get the lion's share of the resources, and initially because they have the population bases and we don't. And so we just kind of have to factor. So little things like that, you know, have a food supply, have water supply, connect with your neighbors, you know. Know that who are the folks around that have skills that you can go rely on. I know there's a lot of CERT members within the Brooktrails area that have trained over the years with OES. And then I think they're branching out. There's some in Willits, there's some up in Laytonville. Those kind of folks, we need to organize them because what's going to happen is these are the folks that are going to be there at the time of the incident, you know, things like that. So back to, I think this is primarily, at least what I was told, kind of a fire evacuation type of meeting for the concerns that came out of the October event. Right now, the Office of Emergency Services is creating an evacuation addendum to the County Emergency Operations Plan. It'll probably be the first written evacuation plan we've had in Mendocino County. What we plan to do, that first piece will be kind of a overall for countywide terminology, things like that we work with the fire departments on, you know, and then the individual communities. And then we plan to go out to individual fire districts and work specifically with the districts to address ingress, egress routes, you know, the best possible ways to notify folks, you know, those kind of things. But that's going to be fairly time consuming. So in the meantime, as a community, we need to prepare, you know, for you know, our own issues that'll pop up. The other thing with emergency notification. So we have a system within the county of Mendocino. It's called the Everbridge system, and it's generically referred to as reverse 911. Anybody ever gotten one from us? Okay. It's a very good system, but it relies solely on landline telephones, or folks have signed up themselves to put your cell phone information in there.
How many signed up on cell phone?
How many people have signed up on Everbridge to get the emergency? Oh, that's good. So what happens is you go in and you give yourself an address. You can actually give yourself multiple addresses if you have, you know, different places that you need to take care of, your work, you know, and or home. That way you can get notification on both. But it will kind of zero in on that. There is also a system within the state. Well, it's a national system actually. It's called WIA, and it's a wireless emergency alert system. And it's a lot like the Amber Alert when you get it on your cell phone if something happens. You can opt out of that one, but if you haven't opted out and the system is used correctly, what will happen is you will get a notice in that area regardless of your cell phone carrier. And that's one of the things we had a struggle with in October. We did not use it specifically because as it's designed, it goes county-wide and you can't narrow it down. So if we had an incident isolated to Brooktrails, and you know, I might take in the city of Willits because Brooktrails and Willits are very closely related on how things affect each other. You know, if we had that ability to kind of draw a circle around these two communities and punch it out to them, then we probably would have done that. And that's one of the push since this October firestorm in Northern California that came up. It also came up in the Thomas fire down in Ventura and Santa Barbara, is that emergency managers such as myself are hesitant, and I chose the night of the fire down there not to use it because our CAL FIRE dispatch and our dispatch was overloaded when we started. You know, we were not getting all the calls. So if we punch out an entire notice to the entire county, what happens is they simply shut down our entire dispatch services, which is something we can't do. So that's why we chose it. there's a push, that's my 1 minute warning, there's a push at the state level to try and create that ability to isolate those to certain communities, and that will be a much better tool. So we do have some of those tools out there. If you have not signed up on our emergency alert system, please do so. And then the other thing is, it is encouraging to see people here interacting with us. It just advances the education, and I'm going to turn it over to Todd before I get yanked off the stage.
Well, just before we do, Shannon, could you give us the... Yes, thank you. Just by way of summary, what would you say are the sort of 3 or 4 really high-level messages that we here and our communities need to know?
So from my perspective, 1, prepare at home. So have a plan with your family, you know, have food, water, shelter, items, things like that, medication. So that's preparedness. Have a plan with your family, and that basically get it in your head, you know, so to speak, that the government may not be able to facilitate all the things we think it should due to limited resources or the situation. So prepare at home.
Thank you, Shannon. Early on in my career, one of the things I learned working with large organizations was really critical for me, and is looking at worst case scenario planning. Most large organizations do this, and they spend a lot of time and effort on it. And the reason they do it is threefold. One is, what could possibly happen? What if, ... And they really look at that very critically and detail that. The second point is this: when you plan back from that possibility of the worst case scenario, that gives you an action, because when there is a crisis, all of us tend to move in that panic mode. And what happens with the mind and the brain is that we get extremely laser focused, and we often forget and miss things. So having a plan in place already is really important. And the third thing, when you have a sense of what you would do in a severe situation, strangely enough, this gives you a certain peace of mind. It's like insurance, if you think about it. So I just want to make that point to you. I'm sure you're familiar with that idea, but that's really, in a sense, what we're talking about here, so that we can enjoy ourselves in this wonderful place and know that if push comes to shove, we know what to do.